The game Final Fantasy XIV changed the way that I looked at video games forever. Let's talk about that. Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Luminari and I am glad that you clicked on this video today. We are going to be talking about why and how Final Fantasy XIV really changed my life and the way that I looked at video games. If you like videos like this, I'm going to try and get one out at least every month that I can. I'm going to try and keep them semi-short, around 15 minutes. We'll see about that. But if you do like that content, please click subscribe down below and drop a like on the video. If you also would like to drop a comment about your experiences in Final Fantasy XIV, that would be amazing. Please, please, please leave your experiences down below. And with that, let's jump into my thoughts about Final Fantasy XIV. So coming into this video, I wasn't quite sure exactly what I was going to do with this. I originally was going to break it by expansion per video and have it be like 8-10 minute videos about each expansion. I was going to make it one big video where it was like 60 minutes talking about every expansion. And I kind of realized that that's not the video that I wanted to make about Final Fantasy XIV. While this is a review on the game and the stories that it's been telling and where is it right now, I feel like this is best serviced as just telling you why it changed the way that I look at video games and why I think that this may be one of the greatest video games of all time. So let's start off first with my experience with the game. I started playing this around 2019, 2020, when the whole world just kind of started, you know, going inside for a while. I played WoW for a little bit back in like 2017, and I kind of really just liked the way that they did grinding stuff. And I always looked at Final Fantasy XIV as this big game that I could never get into because it was so big and there were so many people in the community, and I was just so scared to jump into it. But I now had a boatload of time on my hands since my job was work from home and I could only really do it for like 4 or 5 hours a day. Jumped into Final Fantasy XIV. And as I did that, I realized that there was this expansive world before me. If you told me that by the end of my adventure, I would have gone to the moon, I would not have believed you one bit, because it starts so small. You have 3 major towns and then you slowly branch out from them, but these 3 major towns are kind of like the hub point for literally the first expansion. And I think that that's insane to think about, how far we have come in just, you know, 10-14 years, however long this game has been up and about. It's insane to think about that. And yeah, the story started slow for me back in 2020. I stopped playing in 2021 as soon as I hit the middle of the second expansion. But that isn't the story I want to tell. I want to tell you the story of the person who picked up the game in 2023 and now in 2024 has done almost all there is to do story-wise in the game. So A Realm Reborn always gets crapped on for how weak it might be or how bland the story is. And I will say that there are points that it's like, all right, come on, let's get the story together. But I think meeting the Scions and meeting the Primals and having Gaius and La Habrea as villains kind of just eventually really leads into this really cool concept of good versus evil, light versus dark, Hydaelyn versus, you know, the Ossians, or Zodiark at that point. So we have all these sorts of different things that are happening in the world that we really need to like figure out what's going on. And I think A Realm Reborn does give you that, and it gives you little bits and pieces as you're going through the main story, like, ooh, there could be some stuff here, or ooh, there could be some stuff over here. And it does a really good job with that. And let me just say, like, 2.5, the ending of 2.5 is what got me into Final Fantasy XIV. I think that that is the turning point in storytelling for Final Fantasy XIV, because at that point you were the warrior of light, you were part of the Scions of the Seventh Dawn, and you were everything. And then all of a sudden everything was taken away from you besides your power that you had, and it's just you and this little boy known as Alphino. And I know he's not little, but we have Alphino who is with you, and we just go to Horsefont and are like, hey, we're done. We don't know where our friends are. We don't know if they're alive. We just kind of need to figure out what's going on. And I think that leads into my favorite expansion in the game, which is Heavensward, because it does so many good things. It introduces you to so many cool characters like Estinian, Emmerich, Horsefont, you know, the whole Four Tom family, all these sorts of really cool people that really just want to see the world thrive and be happy. And there's so many people that are trying to stop it from being happy and being this place that people want to live in. And the Ossians are doing their own thing, trying to convince, like, you know, basically the Pope of the place, the Bishop, to be this like leader that kind of gets rid of everything and continues this Dragon Song war. While you have people like Estinian, who has this deep hate for dragons and realizes that this hatred for dragons is really misplaced in his heart, and eventually it's at one point, you know, works together with dragons. And eventually, you know, Nidhogg, obviously there's that whole plot with Nidhogg and Estinian and Hraesvelgr and Bahamut and Tiamat and all that sort of stuff, which is really cool, but I'm not really going to talk about it in this video. But I just think that the character growths that happen in this story are insane, and I think that it really served the basis for me of what was to come going forward. And not to mention that the environments got a lot better in this. I think some of the side quests and the dungeons got better in this as well. It just served as this leaping off point for the rest of the expansions to kind of jump on the back of Heavensward and realize what made Heavensward so important to the story and why it succeeded so well in trying to tell that story versus A Realm Reborn. Now, we're going to move on to Stormblood, which I think is a step back from where they were in Heavensward. Stormblood is probably my second least favorite expansion out of all of them, but that's not saying much, because if you know, you know, like there's a whole bunch of stuff coming up that is really good that I'm going to talk about, and some stuff that is really bad. But I think Stormblood itself tells the story that it really needs to. I think the interlude chapters of Heavensward into Stormblood, learning about the Griffin, you know, Papa Limo sacrificing himself to make sure that we can, you know, go into Alamigo and make sure that we deal with the summoned primal. I'm not quite sure what it was. I haven't played that raid storyline yet, so I'm not quite sure. I don't know if it was Bahamut or what, but it was something that they summoned and Omega stopped them from doing it, which I think is really cool. And that sort of storyline really led into the idea of freedom and wanting to break away from the tyrants that like are holding people back. And I think the whole story with Lise and realizing that she's not actually Ida, she took up the mantle of Ida specifically because she felt like she needed to and wanted to continue fighting for the greater good. I think that that is such a cool storyline, and I think that Lise realizing who she was and what she had to do in order to become the leader of Alamigo and to get these places back, I think was such a good idea. And I think they succeeded on that. I know some people might have a problem with Lise from what I've seen in the community and how they handled her and stuff like that, but I think they did a really good job of establishing all these different characters in Stormblood and their reason for fighting, like Raoban coming back and realizing that he's the bull of Alamigo and fighting for his homeland and getting to meet all these different people, which I think was the one thing that threw me off in this expansion when we went to Doma and Kugane. I think that's my favorite part about the expansion, in my opinion, but it was out of left field for me. I'm just saying, for me, it just felt like, oh, we're going to Doma? What? We're going to Kugane? Huh? I thought this was a story about Alamigo, but I mean, in terms of the story, it does make sense why we're going there, because we need help taking back the capital and stuff like that, which makes sense. But I think it's just a really cool expansion. There's some great character work in there with Yotsuyu and, you know, Kugiri and all these sorts of people that really ground this story in like their heritage and what they're fighting for. And I think that this whole story, like this idea of wanting to get back what was yours and realizing like we have to fight for this, I think it works. For me, it worked very well, but there was just some disjointedness because they had to throw in Xenos, and Xenos is a great villain. We'll talk more about Xenos later, but I think Xenos like felt like this terrifying villain that, you know, was willing to do anything to get what he wanted, and at the end it just kind of was like, I'm gonna throw this all away, I'm gonna do all this sort of stuff, and it felt like a really lame conclusion to this sort of stuff. Not to mention that I'm happy that Astidian came back for a little bit and was like, let me help out my bro, let me help out the Warrior of Light for a little bit and destroy these few things here and there. But overall, I think that Stormblood was on the weaker side of expansions. I liked the environments, I liked the music. The music's probably some of my favorite in the game. But overall, I think compared to Heavensward, it didn't have the impact that it wanted. It was a little slow on the pacing. There was parts where it felt really fast, parts where it felt really slow. And I think Heavensward did that a lot better. If the parts were slower, they were giving you bits and pieces of tidbits of stuff that were going to happen in the future, while this just felt like we were talking about the politics of Girabanya, which is not the best for me. Now, these next two are very near and dear to my heart. Shadowbringers and Endwalker. I have a hard time talking about them separately because of the way that one really leads into the next one, and the stuff that happens in Shadowbringers, how it affects the bits and pieces that happen in Endwalker. And I think that we do a disservice, or when I see videos talking about Shadowbringers and Endwalker nowadays, when these expansions have been out for multiple years at this point, people will make a video on Shadowbringers and then they'll make a video on Endwalker. And yes, I understand that they're two different expansions, but I feel like their stories together make the end of this saga together. And I'm gonna start with Shadowbringers, obviously, but I might mention that stuff that happens at Endwalker, so forgive me if I jump ahead at some points and come back. I think the storyline with Gratia reaching out and pulling all these scions to this new world, to the world of the first, I think is such an interesting concept, and I'm so glad that I did not get spoiled for that before any of this. Like, I had no idea what was happening to the scions. I had no idea why they were falling down. I knew that Shadowbringers was next, but I had no idea what the concept of it was. And I distinctly remember sitting there and us like having the final few people and us fighting Xenos at the very end of, what is that 4.5 3.5? No, it's 4.5. When we are standing in that circle and we beat him, and then all of a sudden we get yanked out of that fight, you know, we get yanked into the world of the first, and let me tell you how I was like so excited, because I had no idea who the Crystal Exarch was. Like, that reveal at the end, when we finally realized who it was, you know, or like when I was finally able to put the pieces together, kind of who it was. Oh my, that is one of the greatest video game experiences for me, is when I'm able to put pieces together, but I'm still not quite sure if that's what they're doing. And then the payoff for it at the end is just amazing. It's so good. But Shadowbringers itself, you know, it starts off like a horror story, you know, like I will remember sitting in the room that I'm recording this exact video in. I was sitting in this room watching these people turn into the Light Wardens, And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I'm a scaredy cat. I hate scary games. And I was terrified. I was so scared that Shadowbringers was going to like stop my Final Fantasy XIV journey because of how like sickening it almost was to see this happen, which is crazy to think about. But I kept pushing through it and getting to see all our characters in their new costumes and seeing how they've adapted to the world of the first and learning like Ardbert and all this sort of stuff. What has happened on this world is just, Yoshida did such a good job just filling in these little gaps of why things happened here and why they haven't happened in our world and why we're trying to stop things from happening in our world and why being the warrior of light maybe isn't the best idea. We need to find the balance between the two. And I think being called a Shadowbringer the first time was crazy. It was crazy to think about. And we haven't even gotten to my favorite part of the expansion yet, which is the villain. I think in Stormblood, the villains were okay. Like, thinking back on it, I didn't mention them at all because, in my opinion, they were okay. They were mid. But you cannot tell me that Emmett Selk is not the best written villain in a Final Fantasy series of all time. I think Emmett Selk being this person that's like, hey, I'm not going to stop you from doing what you're going to do, but I'm here to help if you really want my help. I'm not going to interfere. You got to figure out what you're doing yourself. But if you ever need my help, I'm going to be here. And him just kind of being there every single step of the way and like throwing stuff back in their faces. And, you know, coming to that final moment when you ascend to Vothi's castle and you're sitting there and the crystal eggs are like kind of revealing and you're like, oh my god, is he the twist villain? Is he the one that's like going to like end us, you know? And realizing like that's not the case, and Urianger like kind of is trying to tell you what's happening, and then all of a sudden you hear like I want to say it was a gunshot. I need to go back and watch it, but the sound of like something happening and Emmett Selk being like, I told you, don't mess with what's going on, you know? And we finally got to the point of where we started messing up the things that he had planned. And I think it was an amazing ending. The don't forget us line, you know, don't forget about us, tell our story, is insane. I remember that fight when we're like in the dark realm or whatever, the void, and we're like crawling up and we're not dying, and he's like so shocked, and there's that moment of shock on his face and we don't know why. We're not sure at this point why that happened. And then we end up defeating him and he gives us that speech at the end, and it's just like, this is why I play video games. This is why this video game has changed my life. Because I sobbed at the end of it. Because I thought truly that we weren't going to be able to have Graha be back with us. You know, that Emmett Selk was this character that was so invested in what he believed in that almost to a point I was invested in what he believed in. You know, he was such a good villain at that point. And let me tell you, I had to take a break between Shadowbringers and Endwalker because I could not do it. I couldn't sit there and I couldn't sit and continue the story because I had to sit with what just happened at the end of Shadowbringers. And I think this is why I really like to talk about Shadowbringers and Endwalker as a complete story rather than them being two separate expansions, because of the way that everything that happens in Shadowbringers leads to what's happening in Endwalker. And moving on to Endwalker, I sit here and I'm looking at my microphone and I'm staring and looking at my Audacity recording as I'm doing this, and I'm fighting back tears because Endwalker was such a moving experience for me. It was such a well-written conclusion to a story that took years upon years upon years to write. If you have stuck with me in the video and you have not played Endwalker, I behoove you to do so. I think that Endwalker is one of the best written stories of all time. I know I said that Heavensward is probably my favorite because I like the characters in Heavensward a lot. Like, they just hold a special place in my heart. But I think story-wise, Endwalker, hands down, is the best. I remember going back and talking to Emmett Sell, Hythlodaeus, Hermes, Medium, you know, all these people, and realizing like they cared so much. They wanted what was best for the universe. Hermes, all he ever wanted was to send things out into the universe to know that the rest of the worlds are going to be okay. And the reason why all these people turned so evil, or we viewed their ambitions as evil, was because he felt like there was nothing that he could do to make sure that the worlds could be happy, that the universe past this point could be happy, because none of his experiments that he had sent out to the universe had come back to him. None of them have told him that everything's going to be okay. So each one of them had fallen into this despair and this darkness, and all he wanted to do was to stop us from doing it. And the reason why Hydaelyn exists, and the reason why like this whole plan exists, is because of us. Because of us. Because we went back in time and talked to them and told them that this was going to happen and we need their help. It was such an amazing story. And I will never forget that walk up the meteor. That walk where you hear every single character from the game. Well, not every single character, but all these characters talking to you. I say that this is why Heavensward is my favorite expansion, because I was crying that whole time, number one. But two, hearing Horsefant again after however many hours, and hearing Midgårdsummer telling us that we are strong once again. Ooh-wee, that tore me apart. It's tearing me apart right now as I'm recording this, but I cannot stress how well the ending of this story was told. When we sat upon the end of the meteor and Emmett and Hythlodaeus show themselves again and go and tell us that life is still worth living, that there's places on the world that we haven't seen yet, and that was his final thing to us, was just keep living and remember us. That, I think that was the perfect end of the story. Obviously, we're not at the end yet, because I still want to talk about what happens after this. But for me, that is kind of what wraps up the story. Yes, we have our fight with Medion and everything next, which is great. But for me, that rounds the story out. It takes the A Realm Reborn, Heavensward, Stormblood, Shadowbringers, and it brings them to a close. Like, it shows us that all the stuff we were fighting for is worth it. And all we need to do is show that we are able to defeat despair. That we are able to show that there's still light somewhere in the universe for us to keep living. And Going forward, the scene where we're floating around in the twister and us pressing the button and letting it float and having all our friends taken away because that's who we care about the most. That was also a scene that hit pretty hard. But obviously the biggest thing at the end of this is when Xenos, like our true foil in the story. Yes, we had Zodiark, who was like the big bad, you know, but the true foil to the Warrior of Light was Xenos. And for him to come and save us, not necessarily save us, but help us defeat despair, because he believed that we are the reason that the world still exists, and the reason why he's still alive is because of us. It just is a great way to end that story as well. And the fight at the edge of the world, at the edge of time, where we fight Xenos, and both of us are like dying. Like we're about to die. Like the Warrior of Light's about to come to an end and everything, and it just, the final scene with him and realizing, I don't know if this is confirmed canon, but it's at least in my head, the way that it happened, is that the final moments with Xenos, when we were kind of fading out, was that he was the one who pressed the button and threw it over to us and basically wanted us to keep living. I think that moment as well is one to keep in my heart forever, you know, because that's the end of the story. We beat the Ascians. We beat Xenos. Our world is going to be okay. So what's next? What's this next part of our journey? And I think that's where they started to fumble the ball a little bit. Sorry, I just kind of looked at the recording time for this and realized that this is going to be a long one. I'm sorry that it's very, very long. I was trying to keep it short, but I know talking about Shadowbringers kind of made this a longer video. But this last little bit, I promise you, is going to be very short. I'm going to talk a little bit about Dawntrail. Dawntrail is an okay expansion. I think it is the worst of the bunch. I think it is worse than A Realm Reborn, specifically because the character direction wasn't as good as the first story arc. I love Wuklamon as a character. I think Wuklamon as a character works really, really, really well. And us taking a back seat because we've finished our story. The Warrior of Light, we've done it all. You know, we've defeated Xenos. We've gone to the end of the galaxy and fought despair itself, basically. We deserve a little bit of a break. And so when we are asked to be brought along on this journey to a world that we've never heard of, or we've heard little bits and pieces about, and Crow's like, hey, can you come with me because I want to find out some cool stuff about my parents? And we're like, sure, let's go ahead. Let's do that stuff. And we go and we mentor Wuklamon. You know, we get to see all these things happening. We get to experience Alexandria and like that sort of stuff. Like that stuff is all pretty cool, you know, like it's a pretty cool concept, but for us, it's really not that big of a deal. I like the way Jesse Cox put it. If we were let go and Wuklamon said, oh, let me show us what you really got, we would be done. Like they would be done in an instant. You know, we have the Scions of the Seventh Dawn all here. We have the Warrior of Light with the power of Hydaelyn. Not to mention Azim himself or herself. That is who we are. We are one of the like original, like we have the crystal of Azim. They would be done. We would not have to worry about anything. But let me tell you this. I think it's getting too much hate for what it is. Dawntrail is supposed to be this nice opening story for this next arc to come. We see bits and pieces of it here and there, We see the bottom of the hourglass that has Azum's crystal sign on it. We know that this story is going to be about Azum and how Azum is going to react to everything. I think that is this next part of the story. We are figuring out who we are, or who Azum was, and why did he do all these great things for these people. I think that's what this is going to come down to. And that's really all I have to say on Dawntrail. I don't have much to talk about. I think the villains are unforgettable. I think the music's mid. I think the only saving grace of this expansion is Wooklamont. Wooklamont is literally the only reason why I kept playing this expansion, because I wanted to see where her growth was going to take. That might be a hot take, but that's it for me. All right, if you made it to the end of the video, thank you so much. I know this was more of a ramble talking about stuff. I hope you understand why I think Final Fantasy XIV changed my life for the better, because the storytelling in this video game was some of the best, if not the best, of all time. I know that I haven't even talked anything about combat or dungeons. I may have reached a little bit here and there. I think specifically in Heavensward and Stormblood I mentioned a little bit, but I didn't even talk about the combat, because to me that takes second place to how this game made me feel from an emotional standpoint and a story perspective standpoint. If you would like to leave comments down below sharing yours, I would love to read them. If not, please leave a like on the video and subscribe for more content. I think my next big video is probably going to be on Dragon Age the Veilguard, so keep your eyes peeled out for that. Once again, thank you all so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, week, month, year, and I will see you back here for another video. Peace out.